Sorry, here we go. Good. Now we're learning this is a sikha, a speech the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, the King Moshiach gave in 1991. 1991, and it was on Gimmel Tammuz. On that year, last week's Torah portion, Korach, fell on Gimmel Tammuz. So it's last week's Torah portion. Usually we learn about this week's Torah, but you'll see that here it concludes also this week's Torah portion, which is called Chukat. The main thing is Gimmel Tammuz. Let's just begin learning. Gimmel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz. Excuse me. Hu Yom is the day Bo Nishtachrer Kavod Kedush Morichama, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in the year 1927, Tafresh Pei Zion, from his imprisonment in the prison, Spolenka prison, which is in Leningrad, on the condition that he would go immediately into exile in the city where he was in Kastromar, All right, for 3 years. Usually they write a Kastromar. Okay, what's the story? Well, let me just go through this very quickly, because this is a long sikha and it's very beautiful, but just a little bit of background what happened. The Chabad movement started in Russia, in Tsarist Russia, like about 250 years ago. And as soon as it started, it had 1 million enemies. Not 1 million enemies, but yeah, maybe even more, actually. First of all, the other non-Hasidic Jews were very against it. Very against it. They wanted Judaism to be an elite thing, a religion where only the big priests are priests, and the people that learn the Torah, they are holy, and everybody else is sort of like second-class citizens and third-class citizens. And Chabad wanted to spread Judaism to all Jews and to all the world. So they didn't like that. Also, there was Napoleon. Napoleon was a big enemy of the first Rebbe of Chabad. Also, the other Hasidim that were pupils of the Maggid Meriges also opposed him. Anyway, there was opposition. This opposition, if there was a while that it abated, it stopped, especially in the time of the Tzemach Tzedek. But then when the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, then it really got big. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, his thing was he was the Moshiach in actuality, but he was trapped in Russia. So he couldn't really spread Judaism out to everybody. You couldn't spread Judaism out at all in Russia, but he did. And because he did, so he eventually got put into prison. He got into prison. And in fact, he wasn't even supposed to be put into prison. He was supposed to be killed the first day. He was sentenced to death. He was sentenced to death by Stalin, by Stalin's men. They say that Stalin's men, you can look it up in Google, he killed up to 50 million of his own people. They don't even know how many to this day. They're like, sure, it was like 20 million of his own people. Anybody who thought was against him, and the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was really against him. What do you mean he was against him? Because he was for life, and he was for mankind, and he was for education, true education. And Stalin was against all these things. And so in Russia, it was totally forbidden to do what the Rebbe was doing. And nevertheless, he did. And he got taken into prison and sentenced to death. And miraculously, something happened. There was a big mix-up on the first night. And they didn't kill him. And then came a world outcry that he was there, that he was in prison, that he should be released him. And Stalin wanted to be, he was very afraid of world opinion. He needed the support of the allies. He didn't want people to think that he was a bad guy. To know that he was a bad guy. So eventually it got all confused, and they decided not to kill him. Rather, they were going to send the Rebbe from exile. And this is after about 2 weeks that he was in prison. So about 2 weeks after, they decided they're going to send him into exile, into a place called Castroma. Here he writes Castror Mor. Okay. They were going to send him into, let's see what this says over here. That's what he said. Okay, good. All right. Other place says Castro. Okay. Not important. So he was sent. Now, Gimmel Tammuz, he was sent. Now, meanwhile, all his pupils were all going crazy. Because without the Rebbe, it's like the Jews without Moses. They just don't know what to do. And so they didn't know, they got news that the Rebbe was leaving prison and he was going to go to exile. But they didn't know if this meant that it was a lesser sentence or a more severe sentence. Because now they were sending him far away. They could do anything they wanted to him. And they knew he was sentenced to death in the beginning, so maybe this was worse. They didn't know. And then it came out that when he was there, about 9 days afterwards, when he was there, as in this place called Castromor, as he was freed. They told him he could go home, but he couldn't get the papers until the day after because it was a holiday. So on the 13th, he got freed. What do you mean he got freed? He got freed from exile, but he was still in Russia. And the ones who really put him into prison were Jews. It was called the Sektia. These were Jews, and a couple of them were even Chabad that had left Judaism totally to be communists. And they hated him. They were running after him, and he had to run away from them. And finally, very shortly afterwards, right in the beginning, and that was Tammuz he got out. A couple months afterwards, he left Russia. He left Russia. He was actually evicted from Russia. And that each one of these parts of the story I told you contains inside of it a whole book of things that happened. Okay, nevertheless, on the third day of Tammuz, that was the day, 1927, Taf Reish Pei Zayin, the Rebbe got released from prison and sent to exile. Bishato, at the time, Lo Yadu, they didn't know if it was a good thing or not. And what would be the results from what happened. Because even though that this city of refuge, the city of imprisonment they were sending him to is a lesser imprisonment at first glance than in prison. Because in prison, he couldn't walk around, he couldn't, and you were all together with all these very low-life people. Nevertheless, it still is exile with all the limits which are in exile. And said there's also a danger that they could regret. He was still under their control. Somebody could say, what? You let Schneerson go. Call up over there, have him killed. They could have done it in a second, no problem. But after Biyom Yud Beis Tammuz, and you on the 13th day of the 12th day of Tammuz, like a little more than a week later, Kibel and Kostromar, he got the news in Kostromar that he was freed. And the Tuda Chafesh and the document, the certificate of freedom, he only got the next day, Yud Gimmel Tammuz. And then when he got freed totally, that was called the day of redemption. That the third day of Tammuz, then they realized that it was really good. That was the Ischalta de Gula. That was the beginning of the redemption. In addition to this, that he came out from prison, and he was sent to this city of refuge. It was known afterwards, Hagliato, the Castromar, that when he was freed to the city of Castromar, I'm sorry, Kar Strar Mar. Again, this is the first time I did this. I missed. Ba came in a place of the. It came in the place of the death sentence. Rahman Aslan Shenifsach Lo B'Lifnei. After, when he got out, so it was revealed that really it was written in their records that he was sentenced to death. And then they were reconsidering because they mixed it up somehow. They didn't kill him on the day they were supposed to. So they mixed it up what to do. Meanwhile, there was world opinion was starting to build up. So they said, no, we're not going to kill him. Let's just send him for, I think, first of all, it was 10 years. And then they finally decided 3 years in exile. And finally, when he got there, a little bit more than a week later, they said, okay, you're free total. Okay, now you have to understand something. If the Rebbe, something would have happened to the Rebbe, then that would have put into danger the Kol Emshech Inyan, Harbatz Torah, spreading out Torah and strengthening Judaism in general, and spreading out the well springs of Hasidut outward. Okay, what's the big deal? What do we have to, so they have to spread out Hasidut and we have to spread out Torah. What for? Let the world alone. Let it be what it is. Well, that's what Korach said. Korach said, let everybody be alone. The purpose of the Rebbe was to activate people and activate people that did not want to be activated and activate people in directions that they didn't want to go. The Rebbe said, Judaism is a thing which is supposed to affect the entire world. We cannot rest one moment. You have to spread out Judaism. First of all, to the Jews, and then to the whole entire world. And for sure, you have to stand neged anything which cools down this enthusiasm for Judaism. And a lot of times, the big battle that has to be fought are these people that say, no such thing as Moshiach, and forget about Moshiach and Chabad with Moshiach. These guys are nuts and everything. And that becomes the enemy. And the enemy is complacency. The enemy is, how do you say, the success? Ooh, success. Success becomes the big enemy. People are willing to do anything for success. And the success might be going to heaven. Success might be being a big Rosh Hashiva. Success is a good thing, but it can be hijacked very easily. As long as the Rebbe is the only one that's making everybody crazy. That's the job of the Rebbe, to make everybody crazy, to make the Jews never complacent, never satisfied. Always have to be happy, but never satisfied. Until Mashiach transforms the whole world. Therefore, if the Rebbe he's the only one doing it. He is the only one doing it. And not only if the Rebbe wasn't there, it wouldn't be done. Even now the Rebbe is here. There's people that oppose him doing that. And in place of this, instead of negating the Rebbe totally, right, the Rebbe could have, God forbid, been killed. In place of this, they lessened his sentence and they sent him to exile. That was in Gimmel Tammuz. Until finally, this brought to a total freedom on Yud Beis and Yud Gimmel Tammuz. And because of this miracle, so this on Yud Beis Gimmel Tammuz, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was actually freed, this is called the day of his freedom. Every single year, Yud Beis Gimmel. But the fact is that Gimmel Tammuz, this third day of Tammuz, that was really the day of the freedom. That was really the whole thing began. It just became revealed afterwards. Well, we celebrate only the end of the days. The Yud Beis Yud Gimmel. The question is obvious, because this big miracle that God, there was a big miracle from God. Therefore, they had Yodula Hashem Chasdo. We have to always praise God for all the miracles that He does for us, right? We're supposed to praise God this, that we wake up in the morning, that we have eyes, we have nose, we have a mouth. You have to praise God for everything we have, especially big, major things. God saves that one Jew that's going to take us all out of this terrible exile. In this case, it was the previous Rebbe. You have to give praise. If the first day that God really saved them was the third day of Tammuz, then why do we celebrate 9 days later? Why wasn't the miracle complete? Why did God have to schlep it out and make these different stages? Why wasn't it just right? Like God took the Jews out of Egypt. Take them out. Why did it have to be with the Rebbe that he took the previous Rebbe out? First of all, that was the beginning, Gimmel Tammuz. Then he got out of prison. Then afterwards, it was Yud Beis, Yud Gimmel Tammuz. Only after that, he was free totally. And even more, even after Yud Beis and Yud Gimmel Tammuz, it still wasn't a complete redemption over the opposite side, communism. Kefisha Roim Bapol, we can see actually. The previous Rebbe was evicted from Russia. He was evicted from communist Russia. In a few months after he was released from prison, he was evicted. But he left all of his Hasidim were left behind. The Rebbe said, I was evicted I wouldn't have left on my own, he said. He didn't want to separate from his Hasidim. Even more so, communism was still powerful. Those were like the big, powerful years over there. Stalin was making all sorts of what was it called, purges and killing all sorts of people. Acha Balagula, the previous Rebbe, communism was so strong that the previous Rebbe had to run away from there. Pamenios Vikuvim, Notru, and they forced him out, but Notru Sham, the Kamavakamashanim, and communism, oppressing Judaism, it was there for many, many years afterwards, right? When did the Iron Curtain fall? In 1990. This is like, stayed there for 63 more years. But only now, B'shani Machi Achronos, in Mamish, the last year here, the Rebbe made the speech in 1991. In 1990, that's when L'mayla Mishishim Shana, more than 60 years after the previous Rebbe got out of prison, Tuf Reish Pei Zion, at 63 years, we can see only the results of this, the redemption of all of the Jewish people that got out of Russia, like the Rebbe is going to talk about later. Suddenly, all of a sudden, with Gorbachev, the walls fell down. Anybody wants to go out can go out. Anyone wants. So really, the effect of what the previous Rebbe did was only really felt 63 years later when communism fell. Because communism is one of the anti-Jewish forces, anti-God forces, and the purpose of Judaism is to educate the whole world what God is. And communism was a big obstruction. And certainly in this order, I say to Razeh, this order, the Geula came in all sorts of different stages. Hubashkacha pratis. Obviously that God took the previous Rebbe out in stages. This is exactly what he wants. God knows what he's doing. In Talmud, there must be some reason. And we can't say the reason is just to torture us. Instead of letting the previous Rebbe out suddenly, that's it. Had to come in stages, little by little. And especially, the Nasi B'Yisrael, especially we're talking about here, the freedom of a leader of the Jewish people, a king. Geula Klalis, L'Kol Bnei Israel, this is a general redemption for all the Jewish people. Kefisha Bala Geula Kotev, like the previous Rebbe writes, La'oti Pilvad Ga'ala Kodesh Baruch Hu, that God did not free me alone on the 12th day of Tammuz, but all of the people who love the Torah, keeping the commandments, and just anyone who calls himself a Jew. They were also freed. On the third day of Tammuz, which was years earlier, many, many generations before this, there was also another miracle. How long before? 3,000 years before, a little more than 3,000 years earlier. There was another miracle on that same date. What was the miracle? Gimmel Tammuz. B'yom Omar Yeshua, that was the day that Joshua said, Shemesh b'givon dom. When Joshua came to conquer the land of Israel, he was winning a battle over his enemies, and the sun was setting, and he couldn't fight in the nighttime. So he asked God to do a miracle, and sure enough, the sun stood still in the sky. it says the whole stars, the whole, we'll talk about it, what exactly happened. Nevertheless, the sun stopped. V'yidom Hashemesh, the sun was silent. It says the sun, another word for it was silent. We'll see what that means. Stopped. Ad kiyum yakum goy oivav, until Joshua defeated his enemies. Since that everything is directed by God, and every year comes back the same things as they were the first time, right? For 3,300 times, we are feeling the same godly miracle in a much more spiritual way that happened to Joshua. So if so, Tzorich and Lomar, we have to say that certainly there must be some sort of a connection between these two miracles that happened on the third day of Tammuz. That Shemesh Begivon Dom, that Joshua stopped the sun, V'tchilat Gula, and the beginning of the redemption of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, like we're going to learn later on in Siv Zion. All right, so again, I just want to stress again that the Chabad movement is the only one that has got at its goal and its purpose and its mission statement to improve the whole entire world, all mankind, and to bring all of the Jewish people without exception, first, bring all the Jewish people without exception back to their senses. Back to their senses. The Jewish people start doing the Torah, keeping the commandments, because that's what the Creator wants. The Creator is creating them. That's the only movement that has in its goal, and it's actively pursuing this goal. There's emissaries all over the world to awaken every Jew and to educate, whenever possible, all the non-Jews as to what God is. And without the leader, the Rebbe, as it can't be done. Can't be done. Can't be done. We just want to be normal like everybody else and leave me alone, like Korach did. So as improbable as this all sounds, might sound, I don't know, this little handful of Jews. But we have to remember that all of Judaism is based on one person, Abraham, and Abraham had the same determination and power of defiance and same, amazingly positive, beautiful goal of bringing the whole world to be the way it was supposed to be before Adam ate from the tree, even better. Okay, so let's go here. Joshua came to the land of Israel. He fought this battle, and the sun stood still on the third day of Tammuz. 3,000 whatever years later, the third Rebbe of Chabad, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad got out of prison miraculously on that same day. True, he was sent to exile, but that was the beginning of his redemption. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe is the Moshiach of the generation, designed to arouse all of the Jews in the world, and from them, all of the human beings in the world. And both of these two miracles, both with Joshua and 3,000 years later, by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, that occurred on Gimmel Tammuz. Okay, so we can ask the same question as we asked before. What's the question? Why wasn't in the beginning the miracle in a complete way immediately? We also have to have the same question we can ask by the sun standing still by Joshua. What happened when the sun stood still by Joshua? Let's see, here we go. Since there was a miracle, a big miracle, like for instance, stopping the sun, that this was one of the biggest miracles that was any time in the history of the world, until it says, the Torah even says, right over there, the book of Joshua, Lo haya kayom hazeh, there was not like this day before it or after it. In order that Joshua and the Jewish people would be able to continue their war, so they could, because by seeing the enemy and they could pursue them. Because the sun was standing there on Givon as Chashash Pen Yishka, he thought maybe it would set, and they would not be able to run after their enemy in the middle of the night, and the enemy would regroup or something. They would get them later. Therefore, Omer Lashemesh is said to the sun, Shalo Yelech Mi'alacho, it shouldn't take its usual course. v'yamtin, and wait. I mean, this of course is presupposing that it's the sun that moves and not the earth that moves around. But okay, we'll see that really the whole solar system stopped, the whole world, the whole heavens all stopped. We'll see in a minute. Hari Anais, the miracle was Yochakavar Leos, Nes B'Shlemus. It could have been a complete miracle. Why did God have to make it instead of stopping the sun so that they'll be able to fight in a natural way by the light of the day? I got a better idea. The miracle could have been, I mean, God's doing it. God can do whatever he wants to. He's got a problem. He has to do it gradually. It's too much for him. He can stop the whole sun. God could have made a miracle. God could have just, he should have asked for God that they should win the battle in the daytime. They wouldn't have to stop the sun. Or maybe make it that they could, like the Jewish people when they were in Egypt, it says there was darkness for the Egyptians and there was light for the Jewish people. Nowadays also they have glasses you can see in the nighttime. Right? They can see everyone. It's such a big problem. God could have made it that they could see in the nighttime. Like it says, all the Jewish people had light in their houses when there was the plague of darkness. Like it says in the sentence before this, it says that God sent big rocks from heaven, boulders from heaven on their enemy. God could do a thing like that. What does he have to make the sun stand still for? Throw a big boulder on them, schmeiss everybody, and that's it. You have to stop the sun, and then Joshua has to fight. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. What type of religion is this? What's going on over here? Make a miracle, that's a big miracle, and that's it, right? Also, the very fact that God made the sun stand still, we have to understand what exactly was the miracle. Was this just for the purpose of the miracle, namely the Or Shemesh, that the light of the day Yamshich La'ir, therefore it had to be only that the sun itself would stop. The Yamshich La'ir, and it just could continue shining and all the other stuff, right? Let's say you believe, right, the earth goes around, the earth spins around. Good, you believe the earth spins around. So the earth could have spun around and the sun would just follow the earth, okay? The sun would follow the earth around. But the Rebbe here is presupposing that it's not that way. Also, the Rambam also, that the earth is still and all the skies and the stars, they all move, right? They all move. So he says that the sun, okay, God wants it to be light. So how the sun stood still, everything else moved, and the sun stood still. Similarly, by Emak Ayalon, it says that the moon stood still and Emak Ayalon, or maybe the miracle wasn't just the sun alone. Maybe the miracle was call a Seder Shalom. The whole, namely, Shanesh Atzar Gam et Kolen Yanim Akashurim Malach Hashemesh. Everything that dealt with the movement of the sun, namely the movement of all the stars. Malach Gilgal Yomi, namely the movement of all of the heavens. The Mela Malach Kol Gilgalim, all of the stars, all the sun, all the planets. That's by means of this movement of the heavens. The heavens stopped. Heki Pesav Vakol. Vagam also Totsaomi Zeh Shasiv Vagilgalim Akatanim Vagilgal Hashemesh Atzmo. And what about all of the planets that go around the sun? And what about everything that stopped? We don't know what happened. Does just the sun stopped, or everything stopped? Well, we could say, I mean, why do I have to stop everything? That's a little bit going too far, right? And for God is creating the whole thing. By God, the whole thing is like nothing. It makes no difference to him whether he's moving a little grain of sand or he's moving the whole solar system. By God, it's the same thing. It's just one big creation. So what did happen? The difference between these two ways is we see if just if we say that all of nature changed, by means of this, that nature changed, what? By means of that only the sun and the moon stopped alone. Or we say that the miracle was that not just the sun stopped, but all of nature, all of the heavens, they stopped. Nature was changed. right? So there's a big difference. Did the sun alone stop? Or do we say that God stopped all of nature for that day, 12 hours, who knows? Yesh Lomar, we can say, listen, in any case, we know for sure that the sun stopped. So what happened? Is that important? Yes, it is. We'll see. This is, like we said, two types of miracles. There's a miracle which does not change the nature of a thing, like the nature, for instance, of the plague of blood, that the blood was transformed to water. And as soon as the miracle stopped, as the blood, what did I say? I'm sorry. That God changed water into blood. In the miracle, the first of the 10 plagues, God changed water into blood. And as soon as the miracle stopped, which is only every plague was only a week long. So it says the plague, as soon as the plague stopped, then all of the blood went back to water again, right? Water, similar, also the same thing. If we say that just the sun stopped, so afterwards it came back to the sun, and so the sun would just sort of jump back into its regular place again. It would just jump back, just the sun stopped for a second, and as soon as the miracle went away, so the sun would just sort of jump back into its place where it was in its normal orbit. Or maybe we say no. Maybe this was a miracle that changed the whole world, changed all of nature. Like, for instance, it says that by Moses, that her hand, it says that Miriam, her hand turned into leprosy suddenly. And after the miracle finished, it says that her hand still remained leprosy. So that was it. In order to bring it, it says that you had to have an additional miracle. It says, put your hand back in your this is in the beginning, right? When Moses was asked God for signs to show to the Jewish people. So he said, put your hand in your thing, and it'll be like leprosy. And there was leprosy. That's it. Now God said, you want it to turn back? Put it back in your under your coat and take it out, and it'll be. They had to have an additional miracle. So what's in other words, what a miracle happened? Did just the sun temporarily change? It stopped its orbit, or do we say that no, the sun? That's it. Nature just stopped. All of nature stopped. The whole planets, everything stopped. And in order to make everything come back, as there had to be an additional miracle that God made everything jump back into its place. What happened? Okay, well, this is also the same thing in, we'll have another miracle, and we'll have to stop here today. The miracle was the staff of Aaron. Remember last week we learned the staff of Aaron, that the sign was if his staff grew almonds, then that would be the sign that he was the leader. And what do we see? That his staff grew flowers, and the flowers turned into buds, and the buds turned into almonds. Why did it have to be a natural process? Why? It's the same question, and the Rebbe is going to answer a very, very beautiful answer as we're going to continue, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's just do the Yom Yom for today. God will bless you in whatever you do. Man has to just make a receptacle for his livelihood and endeavor with all of his power that this receptacle, the vessel, should be pure of any impurity or cheating others. In other words, you open up a business, you're just making a vessel. The money does not come from people. The money comes from God. God sends it through people. But you have to make sure that the vessel is clean. This means that whatever a person does, he conforms to the laws of the Torah. By means of this, he becomes a vessel, a receptacle that's worthy of God's blessing. In two ways, his livelihood will be sufficient, and also what he uses his livelihood for will be for good, positive things. Have a good day with Moshiach. Now, God willing, 3:00, we will learn Chumash with commentary. See you all. Thank you for tuning in.